When Jonathan gave a poor boy a bicycle, he had no idea he was saving his grandson, whom he had never met. The truth about his son and their estrangement would soon turn his world upside down. What he learned would surprise even the most experienced. But let's start from the beginning. Jonathan Miller, a 60-year-old billionaire known in Chicago as a successful owner of a construction empire, stood at the pinnacle of success. His life was a collection of achievements: a luxurious mansion in the most prestigious neighborhood, a fleet of rare cars, and offices in skyscrapers built by his own company. Yet, behind all this external shine, there was an emptiness. Many years ago, he lost contact with the most important person in his life: his son, Andrew. After a brutal argument, Andrew left home and never returned, leaving Jonathan with a sense of guilt he couldn't drown out, no matter how much money or success he achieved. One cool autumn day, Jonathan decided to take a walk in the local park, which always helped him relax and distract himself from his thoughts. The park was awash in golden and red leaves, and a gentle breeze rustled through the foliage. Sunlight filtered through the treetops, creating a soft, soothing atmosphere. Dressed in an elegant dark coat and black leather gloves, Jonathan strolled slowly along the path, trying not to pay attention to the lonely feeling that haunted him every time he saw happy families around him. As he walked past a small playground, his attention was caught by a boy standing next to an old rusty bicycle. He was a thin child, no older than 9, with light tangled hair and dirty cheeks. He wore worn jeans, blue sneakers, and a warm but already frayed jacket. The boy, with a furrowed brow, was trying to fix the chain on his bike, but his small hands struggled with the task. He looked focused, but there was a hint of despair on his face. Jonathan stopped, observing the boy. At some point, his heart tightened. He saw something familiar in the child's eyes, something that reminded him of his own son when he was a child. Memories of teaching Andrew to ride a bike and spending time together, back when they were still close, resurfaced in his mind. Jonathan felt an unexpected and deep sense of compassion. He couldn't walk past. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, crouching down beside the boy. "What happened to your bike?" The boy looked up at him with eyes filled with distrust and wariness, but there was also a spark of hope. He was silent for a few seconds before quietly replying, "The chain came off. I can't fix it." Jonathan smiled, trying not to scare him. He realized the boy was used to not trusting adults, but at that moment he felt he had to do something kind to help this child. "Would you like me to help?" he offered. The boy nodded, but there was still a shadow of doubt in his eyes. Jonathan carefully took hold of the chain, but realizing it was too worn out to fix, he suggested a different solution. "How about I get you a new bike?" he asked with a smile. The boy, whose name was Tom, looked at Jonathan with surprise and disbelief. It seemed he couldn't believe that anyone would make such a gift, but noticing the warm, sincere smile on Jonathan's face, he slowly nodded. "Really?" he asked hesitantly, as if afraid it was a joke. "Of course, really," Jonathan confirmed, standing up and extending his hand to Tom. "Let's go pick out the best bike for you." They went to the nearest store, and Jonathan bought Tom the most modern and colorful bike available. The boy's eyes lit up with joy as he rode the new bike for the first time in the park. Jonathan, watching him, felt that for the first time in many years, he had done something truly important. A few weeks passed since Jonathan met Tom and bought him the new bike. Despite his business and responsibilities, Jonathan kept thinking about the boy. He couldn't understand why Tom had triggered such a strong sense of attachment and desire to help. Every time he passed by the park where they first met, he would stop and hope to see the boy again. The park with its golden and orange leaves became a familiar place where Jonathan went to clear his thoughts. He felt he needed to meet Tom again, as if it could provide answers to the questions that troubled him. One sunny day, as a gentle breeze swayed the trees, Jonathan, as usual, strolled down the path. His attention was drawn to the sound of children's voices and laughter coming from the small playground. There he saw Tom riding his new bike. The boy looked happy, his light hair blowing in the wind, and a bright, genuine smile on his face. Jonathan, feeling joy and relief, sat on a nearby bench, watching him. Tom, riding in circles, noticed Jonathan and, recognizing him, rode over. "Hi, Mr. Miller," Tom said cheerfully, stopping next to him. "Hey, Tom," Jonathan replied with a smile. "Good to see you. How's the bike?" "It's amazing," the boy responded enthusiastically. "Thank you so much." Jonathan couldn't help but smile back, but at the same time, he felt a growing sense that there was more to this than a simple coincidence. Every time he looked at Tom, it felt like he was seeing something familiar. His eyes, his way of smiling. It all reminded him of someone he'd lost long ago. "Tom, where are your parents?" he asked cautiously, trying to keep his voice calm and gentle. The boy fell silent for a moment, looking down. His cheerful smile faded slightly, and a sad expression appeared in his eyes. "Mom says Dad left when I was little," he finally replied in a quiet voice. Tom's words pierced Jonathan like an arrow hitting its mark. He felt his heart tighten. Memories of the day his son, Andrew, left home after their argument flooded his mind. Jonathan knew he was to blame for not mending the relationship with his son, and he had lived with that guilt ever since. Now, hearing Tom's story, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no mere coincidence. "I'm sorry for asking," he said softly, trying to maintain a calm tone. "Where's your mom?" "She works. It's just the two of us," Tom responded, brightening up a bit. "She works hard, so we have everything we need." Jonathan felt his heart tighten even more. He understood that the boy was living in tough conditions, and it made him want to help even more. But despite the growing concern and emotions he felt, he decided not to ask any more questions. He needed more time to understand what exactly connected him to this child. "All right, Tom," he said, smiling gently. "Just know, if you ever need help, I'll always be here for you." Tom nodded, and his smile brightened again. He thanked Jonathan, waved, and rode off down the park's paths. Jonathan remained on the bench, watching the boy. Inside, he was overwhelmed with emotions and questions he didn't have answers to. He felt there was a bond between them that he couldn't yet explain. But one thing was clear. He wouldn't leave Tom alone. Several months had passed since Jonathan first met Tom. They started meeting frequently in the park, and their interactions became a tradition. Jonathan noticed how deeply he had grown attached to the boy, and this feeling grew stronger with each passing day. He continued to see traits of his son in Tom, but didn't want to admit it to himself, believing it was merely a coincidence. One day, when Jonathan arrived at the park, Tom was already riding his bike. The bright sunlight illuminated the paths, and the leaves on the trees glimmered in shades of gold and green, creating a cozy atmosphere. Jonathan sat on a bench and smiled as he watched Tom laugh and speed down the path. He felt a sense of pride, as if he were looking at his own grandson, and this feeling filled his heart with joy. But after a few minutes, a young woman approached them. She looked worried, and when her eyes met Jonathan's, they revealed anxiety. She was a slender woman, around 35 years old, with chestnut hair tied in a ponytail and dark eyes. She wore a simple but clean dress, and traces of fatigue were visible on her face. She stopped next to Tom and looked at Jonathan as if she recognized him. "Hello," she said cautiously, her voice tinged with unease. Jonathan stood up, feeling a slight nervousness. He wasn't sure why her presence made him feel this way. "Hello, you must be Tom's mother?" he asked, trying to be polite. "Yes, I'm Emily," she replied, and Jonathan felt his heart skip a beat. The name, her face, it all suddenly became familiar. "Emily?" he repeated in surprise, looking at her intently. "Are you Andrew's girlfriend?" Emily nodded, and a look of sadness flashed in her eyes. She sighed, and her expression grew more tense. "Yes, Andrew and I were together, a long time ago," she said quietly, glancing at Tom, who continued riding nearby. "I recognized you, Mr. Miller. Andrew told me about you." Jonathan felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under him. He couldn't believe that standing before him was the woman his son had once been close to. His thoughts were a jumble, and he couldn't understand how he hadn't noticed it earlier. "Emily, why didn't you ever tell me you had a child?" he asked, his voice trembling. Emily smiled sadly, her eyes darkening. Andrew didn't want me to contact you after your argument, she explained. He was stubborn, just like you. We lived our own lives, but a few years ago, he died in an accident. Those words hit Jonathan like a bolt of lightning. He felt his heart tighten. It was hard for him to breathe, and for a moment, he lost his voice. Memories of the argument with his son, the words they exchanged, rushed through his mind. His pride and stubbornness had cost him the chance to see his son again, and now he learned he had a grandson he hadn't even known existed. "Tom is my grandson?" he barely whispered, looking at Emily with disbelief and desperation. "Yes, Tom is your grandson," Emily confirmed, her eyes filling with tears. "I've seen you spending time with him in the park. I appreciate your kindness, but please, don't interfere in our lives any further. We're used to living just the two of us, and I don't want Tom to have false hopes." Emily's words tore Jonathan apart. He realized that the years spent in pride and loneliness had cost him his family. It felt as though he had been given a chance to change something in his life, but at the same time, he feared it might be too late. He understood why Emily was so guarded, and why she didn't want Tom to know of his existence. "I understand," he said, feeling a lump in his throat. "But I'd like to help somehow. I didn't know I had a grandson. I didn't know I'd lost so much." Emily looked at him silently, pain evident in her eyes. She nodded, but her expression remained stern. "I appreciate your kindness, but Tom doesn't know about you, and I don't want him to. It will protect him from disappointment." With these words, she hugged Tom, and they left, leaving Jonathan standing alone in the middle of the park. He felt as though everything that once seemed important had turned to dust. After the shocking revelation, Jonathan couldn't go on living as he had before. He felt that if he didn't try to mend his relationship with Emily and Tom, he would lose his last chance to gain what truly mattered in life, a family. He couldn't stop thinking about his grandson and all the years he had missed. A burning determination filled his heart, urging him to correct the mistakes of the past. The day after their encounter in the park, Jonathan reached out to Emily. He offered his help, assuring her that he only wanted to be present and support them. However, Emily, still resentful of him for the falling out with Andrew, struggled to accept his offer. She felt that Jonathan had played a significant role in their estrangement, and she couldn't forget how much pain it had caused her family. Her bitterness and caution were apparent, and every time they met, she kept her distance. But Tom was different. Despite Emily's efforts to limit their interaction, the boy had already grown attached to Jonathan. He sensed that this man genuinely cared about him and wanted the best for him. Every time they met in the park, Tom eagerly ran to Jonathan, hugging him and sharing stories about his achievements and school news. For Jonathan, these moments were like a ray of light, affirming that he was on the right path. Over time, seeing how Tom bonded with Jonathan and witnessing his sincere efforts to build a relationship, Emily began to soften. She noticed how happy her son was in Jonathan's presence, and started to realize that perhaps he had truly changed. Slowly but surely, Jonathan managed to earn her trust. He didn't just offer financial support. He actively participated in their lives, showing care for Tom, helping with his schoolwork, and nurturing his talents. One day, after several months of consistent effort, Jonathan proposed that Emily and Tom move in with him. He knew it would be a significant step, but he understood that this way he could become a true support system and a part of their lives. Emily, after long deliberation and discussions, finally agreed, realizing that Jonathan genuinely wanted to be part of their family. The move marked a new beginning for all of them. Jonathan, Emily, and Tom began living together, and Jonathan felt how his once empty and cold home was now filled with life and warmth. He saw how his grandson became a part of his daily routine. Every morning, they had breakfast together. After school, Jonathan helped him with his homework, and on weekends, they organized family picnics in the very same park where they had once met. One day, Jonathan and Tom decided to go biking again, on the same bicycle Jonathan had bought many months ago. They headed to the park, and Jonathan, with a smile on his face, watched as his grandson confidently rode down the paths. Tom circled around Jonathan, laughing and urging him to join. Despite his age, Jonathan grabbed an old bicycle, and together with Tom, rode through the park's lanes. This time, he felt like he had finally found what had been missing in his life for so long. It was as if a circle had completed, and that very bicycle had become a symbol of the new life and family he had gained. Jonathan realized that no amount of money, success, or achievements could replace the warmth and joy he felt spending time with Tom and Emily. He knew that despite the mistakes of the past, he still had a chance to correct his future and become a true grandfather to Tom. The story concludes with Jonathan and Tom riding bikes together, laughing and savoring the moment. This time, Jonathan felt certain he had done everything right. He had found what he had been searching for all his life, a family that accepted him despite everything, filling his life with true meaning.